Welcome, welcome. Today we want to give you a little jean jacket update from our sew along we did a few weeks ago. I've gotten many emails and I'm so excited that so many of you are making your jean jackets. So we're here today to do a slit in the sleeve slit. And so just to clarify, to make sure everybody knows how to do it, we had things scheduled for these Mondays, which is pattern 575, Sonia's blouse, which is our pattern of the month. And we're going to do those. We've done those actually, but we're going to push those back a little bit because we feel like it's so important to do this. I've gotten enough emails that there's many of you who are just not quite clear on how to do that slit in the sleeve. So we're going to clarify that and do it. Also, I finished my jean jacket. What I did when I was sewing is the band was not quite long enough. I took it off just a little bit past center back in the back, and then I finished the edge, and I was able to just pull it just slightly. I hate to say the word stretch, but pull it just slightly to where it went on without any problem. I put the snaps on the front, and I absolutely love it, and I've already worn it several times. So I just really enjoy having this leather jean jacket, which, as you all saw, was just not hard to make. But again, because the slit in that sleeve, some of you really wanted that, we're going to do that today. We're going to show you close up how to do it. We're going to show you a couple different methods. So either way it works, either way, it doesn't make a difference. And what I want you to understand is there's only one part that has to be exact. The rest is really easy. All right, so let's get sewing. So I'm using two different fabrics today, highly contrasted. You would not do this high contrast. Generally, these pieces match. So as I do them, just kind of keep that in mind. I'm going to make a slit. This would be representative. Sometimes it's a seam. It's not actually a slit at all. It's where, for instance, in the jean jacket, you stitch together the upper and under sleeve toward the back seam, and you just stop stitching here. So you don't really determine the slit. The slit, if you had to know, is usually about 5 inches. So I've just cut up 5 inches. But again, you're stitching down and you're stopping there and you're back stitching. But it's the same concept. You're still working with a straight line. So I'm going to take then a piece of fabric, and it's usually about 1 inch wide. I'm going to do it two different ways. So I'm going to make two slits just because I'm going to show you two different ways that you can do this. Either one is done and it's fine. This piece that I'm using is double the length of the slit. So just make sure that it's at least double. You can make it longer if you want. And if you noticed on one, they're the same, but on one I serge the edge to finish it, and on one I'm not going to serge the edge. So I'm just going to give you both options. The way I start to stitch is, if I'm going to do the serged one first, is that I'm going to put the non-serged side, right sides together against the slit. Or the open seam, same thing. I'm going to start stitching actually it is a seam allowance, but it doesn't matter if it's a seam allowance or not. Because again, it's all put into the cuff, and if there's a little extra or a little much, it doesn't make a difference. Sorry, the reason I'm going to change here is you're actually better off to sew with the sleeve up, the fashion fabric itself. Because what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm sewing right to that point. So, sorry, we're going to start again. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to use my seam allowance, and I'm just going to get narrower and narrower and narrower. What I do is I just open this up, and I lay the whole thing down and keep my seam allowance straight and consistent so that when I get to that point, it's still a 3/8. So I'm just going to sew a whole 3/8, and it's almost like I'm just going to sew a straight line. But I've got to make sure that I catch my fashion fabric just right there at that point, and then keep stitching. So that's actually the way it's sewn, and you can see here I've got a little extra. I'll go ahead and cut that off. Okay, so that's how I stitch it. You can see it's a straight 3/8. I've got to make sure I catch that little point there, otherwise I'll have a hole. So be sure you catch that. Then I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this around. And when I have a serged edge, I can actually overlap it, and you could press it here if you want to. I'm not going to. I've done it enough. I'm okay with not pressing it. but pressing it will just kind of help you get this outside piece straight. But what I'm going to do is just fold it under, and just, it's actually like folding it in half is really what it is. And then I'm going to stitch from the right side, because I can stitch right in that ditch area, and I know I'm catching the back side. So again, I'm just stitching all along there. This is underneath, but because I've pressed it, or because I can kind of feel it with my fingers, I know that I'm catching it on the back side. So I'm going to use the expression, you're stitching in the ditch. You could top stitch. You could make it a top stitch right on the band. It just doesn't make that much difference. These all get into your preferences, not, there's no rules, certainly in pattern making, on how to do this. All right, so once I've stitched it there, you can see I've got it on both sides. And then when I go to put the cuff on, one side, both sides are stitched the same. One will go under, like so, and one will go this way. So they'll go opposite directions, just depending. Now that actually is not stitched, it's just where I need to press that, but it's just absolutely perfectly done to where it's right at the edge, and you can see it's smooth there. All right, so then I'm going to show you another way. If you don't have a serger or don't want to finish it or whatever, I'm going to do this, the front part the same way. I'm going to put right sides together. I'm going to stitch it from this side so I can see where I'm stitching, and I want to make sure I get to that point. So again, I'm just going to sew this first part the exact same way. Open this up lengthwise, and then move this to be a 3/8 of a seam allowance from the edge, so that I get a nice straight seam allowance all the way. It's the edge of my sleeve that I'm creating to be less and less and less and less. When you go to stitch to this point, make sure that you're stitching right there and don't take up any more, or else you'll get a pucker on the opposite side. And then again, go back out to 3/8. So you can see right there, there's nothing stitched except right at that point, and that's a good thing. That's what I want. Okay, now this time I have not serged this edge, and so I'm just going to fold it twice. I'm going to fold a little bit under and then wrap it. Now, when I'm doing this method, because your piece is a little narrow, you could cut a wider piece. That's an option also. I actually stitch from this side. And what I'm going to do is follow the stitch line where I'm stitching. So I'm going to try to stitch on that exact same line. I'm going to roll this in slightly and start stitching. So I'm only working a little bit at a time. And again, you could press this also, but I think it's easier just to leave it unpressed so you can see where you're going. I'm just basically covering it just slightly and stitching it almost like an edge stitch to this piece of, to this little strip here. Just so barely cover the stitch. And you can do that very easily as you're walking it along. And then you're stitching right on the edge of the strip. And this way, you don't need any kind of serging. You don't need, it's going to encase itself completely, the band. This is a little bit thicker, but I'm using a denim, so you can see the fabric doesn't make any difference. Even if a leather, whatever, it's not going to make any difference. You're still going to be able to sew through it very easily. You're not going to change your point because you're stitching right at the point, and then you're changing directions. And I'll show you this up close here in just a minute. In fact, I won't stitch it all the way just so you can see where I'm stitching. So what I'm doing is I'm folding that over and stitching and laying and just covering the stitch, and then coming along and edge stitching right there on that point. So on this side, you're not going to see it because it's going to end up being right at the same line I've stitched before. And you can see again, no puckering. It's really giving it a nice hand. So it gives it a really nice feel. Press it, and either way works well. So either with a serged edge or the non-serged edge and do a little roll. Both of those are done just a little bit differently, but as you can see, they both will give you a really beautiful look, and your jacket will look great. So I want to make sure you can see this. You can see the stitching was coming down here. I was folding this under and just basically stitching right at that same place by edge stitching on the piece that's being sewn on. So I think you got it. I just know that we had some of the things were off the camera, so I just wanted to make sure we could see that. All right, happy sewing from Silhouette Patterns.